Rather, they were replaced by ideas that were entirely new, ideas that would not have made sense to classical thinkers. These were ideas that would make sense to us and do. In fact, these ideas still make sense to us. The Renaissance, and indeed the modern world, came into being because during the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries, an interrelated complex of medieval ideas came under challenge and were subject to rethinking. The centerpiece of the complex related to the means of gaining certain knowledge. During the Middle Ages, it was understood that reason and authority were the chief means of gaining certain knowledge. For example, it seemed perfectly reasonable to suppose that the Earth was a stationary object around which the rest of the universe revolved. It was reasonable, and it was affirmed by a towering authority, great 2nd century astronomer Claudius Ptolemy. Similarly, it seemed perfectly reasonable to suppose that heavy objects fall to Earth faster than light objects. And this was affirmed by another towering authority, the polymath genius Aristotle. But during the Renaissance, reason and authority were toppled as reliable guides to knowledge and replaced by observation and experimentation. Without this change, science as we know it would not have come into being, and the Industrial Revolution would not have occurred. During the Middle Ages, it was taken for granted that our relationship with God was a collective thing that only the Roman Catholic Church was empowered to negotiate. During the Renaissance, this dispensation was again subjected to rethinking and was challenged by a completely new one in which our relationship with God was seen as an individual thing that each of us could negotiate independently with God. In this new dispensation was born the magnification and sanctification of the individual that we take for granted in modern times. We all see ourselves as individually valuable and quite fantastically empowered, literally bristling with rights in a way that would have been astonishing to the people of the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, the universe was perceived as a thing that came into being as a finished object just a few thousand years ago. It was fixed, finite, and as much known as it needed to be. In the Renaissance, however, the universe began to be perceived in a much different way, as dynamic, infinite, and largely unknown. It was this change in thinking that led not only to the great age of exploration, but to the great age of scientific investigation that followed and that continues today. All this seems very obvious to us today. The Middle Ages obviously couldn't last forever. Things obviously had to change. But this was not at all obvious to the people of the Middle Ages. As far as they were concerned, people would go on thinking and living the medieval way forever. We think the very same thing. Just like the people of the Middle Ages, we're absolutely sure that people will go on thinking the way we think forever, and people will go on living the way we live forever. The people of the Middle Ages thought this way because it seemed impossible to them that people could think a different way. How else could people think except the way they thought? As far as they were concerned, the history of thought had come to an end with them. Of course, we smile at that, but in fact, we believe exactly the same thing. We too believe that the history of thought has come to an end with us. Well, we better hope that we're wrong about that. Because if the history of thought has come to an end with us, then we're doomed. If there are still people here in 200 years, they won't be living the way we do. I can make that prediction with confidence because if people go on living the way we do, there won't be any people here in 200 years. I can make another prediction with confidence. If there are still people here in 200 years, they won't be thinking the way we do. I can make that prediction with equal confidence because if people go on thinking the way we do, then they'll go on living the way we do. And there won't be any people here in 200 years. But what could we possibly change about the way we think? It seems so obvious that everything we think is just the way it must be thought. It seemed exactly the same to the people of the Middle Ages. Although several key ideas of the Middle Ages disappeared during the Renaissance, not every key idea disappeared. One of the key ideas that remained in place and that remains in place today is the idea that humans are fundamentally and irrevocably flawed. We look at the world around us and find that turtles are not flawed, crows are not flawed, daffodils are not flawed, mosquitoes are not flawed, salmon are not flawed. In fact, not a single species in the world is flawed, except us. It makes no sense, but it does pass the medieval tests for knowledge. It's reasonable. It explains a lot of things. And it's certainly supported by authority. It's reasonable because it provides us with an excuse we badly need. We're destroying the world, eating it alive, but it's not our fault. It's the fault of human nature. We're just badly made, so what can you expect? Another key idea that survived the Middle Ages is the idea that the way we live is the way humans are meant to live. Another key idea that survived the Middle Ages is the idea that the way we live is the way humans are meant to live. Well, goodness, that's so obvious it hardly needs saying. We're living the way humans were meant to live from the beginning of time. The fact that we only began living this way very recently has nothing to do with it. So it took us 3 million years to find it. That doesn't change the fact that it's the way we were meant to live from the beginning of time. And the fact that we live the way we live is making the world uninhabitable to our own species also has nothing to do with it. Even if we destroy the world and ourselves with it, the way we live is still the way we were meant to live from the beginning of time. But these two medieval survivors are relatively benign. Stupid, but harmless. One other idea survived, however, that is definitely neither benign nor harmless. Far from being benign or harmless, it's the most dangerous idea in existence. And even more than being the most dangerous idea in existence, it's the most dangerous thing in existence. More dangerous than all our nuclear armaments, more dangerous than biological warfare, more dangerous than all the pollutants we pump into the air, the water,